Okay, we're going to have some questions for this session for about 15 or so minutes, and then we'll have to take a couple of minutes break, and then we'll have a more general discussion with all the speakers. So, questions?
From an anthropological point of view, I'm very interested about the way there seems to be a slippage between participants and groups. That at some points people are talking about individuals in terms of participation, but actually in terms of the Malmo case, the only time people who were not designers, not within the structure of those being supported by the EU or the cocreation, is the fact that they have to approach as groups, as the Women's Association, as the hip hop organisation. They don't come in as individuals, and so they're actually, you're seeing a facet of them rather than seeing them as individuals. And so that intrigues me.
Yeah. Well, what I did not describe is the way that we've been trying to work. For instance, if we take at the lab in Rosengård, Malmö, is to hang around for quite some time. And there could very well be individuals that have ideas. That's not the problem. But it's extremely difficult to get a project going with if there's not any kind of assembly around it. To give a contrasting example, we're working with a housing cooperative also in Rosengård called Sustainable Hilda. I don't know if that would be. So they have a sustainability agenda, and the board of this these 700 flats they have this. But the individuals do not really have this agenda. So, for instance, working with people who are in their roles as inhabitants, where this does not exist, the collective, have represented really big problem for us. So we've been thinking that, well, maybe if we have a sustainable Hilda, that would be somebody to work with, and someone that would help to organize. Because we have not been interested in, the general living lab or user-driven approach, basically is to have users coming in to test ideas upon, and that's not at all part of this concept. But I think it's a really relevant question. It's not coming from the north, where we are collectives from we go to kindergarten and upwards. Individual is not so important. Maybe at the same time, and that might be an ideological bias. But it's interesting also to see if we compare it to take von Hippe's lead user. These are individuals that are an elite. It's an elite that's ahead of the market. That's why they are lead users. So, and they can very well be individuals, and then they would go and make their company and so on. So I don't have a clear answer to it, but it's in this mess there is something about to be operational long term. Some kind of assembly has to be formed, and something that has a possibility to work over a longer time.
I asked the question as both someone who's practiced as an architect and more recently moved into urban ethnography. And something that strikes me across the talks this morning is the conundrum in a way of the lack of creativity on the data itself. So when we talk about participation, we talk about the marvels of being speculative about the process and including people. And we also move towards the kind of marvels of the object and speculate on what these exquisite things can be or what these political and economic things can be. But I think what seems to be really absent from the talk is the creative capacity of the data itself. And it's almost like we assume that we get this bundle of stuff and then the creative process starts. And I showed it particularly in your talk. It really struck me that the girl is simply a name. There is no creative interpretations to what this thing or being is. And it seems to be the realm of novelists and movie makers who are really good at interpreting and being creative with data. But I wonder what the implications are for design. If designers took data as the kind of fundamental starting point of the creative process, what would the implication be both for process and object? Sorry,
We probably have done it. Yes, but I think, and this is maybe how I'm become too little academic over the years, in the sense that, well, data is one thing, but there are these people, there are the objects that they. I mean, you can see that this is data, and I would say that the challenge that Ture was putting to us was in drawing things together was not only about facilitating process. I think that's too weak about what's going on. It's looking at one of the colleagues that Alex was referring to, the way, and he's trained as an artist and does all this facilitation work. The way he's using his design skills could be seen as mere facilitation. I think that is really worth to look into. So the competence of bringing out creativity, not only in the architect designer, but among the different participants, be them human or non-human, that seems to be. And I did not really address this in the talk in a good enough way, but I think that's really where the challenge is, to do the kind of work that we have been doing with solid objects, but in drawing together these heterogeneous assemblies.
Sorry, Notcha.
Okay, yeah, a question picking up on your remark that this space is already occupied, because I think that's a very good starting point, especially when it comes to participation, where that is quite often forgotten when we talk about designing spaces of participation and things. But I was surprised in a way about the extent to which you drew on quite sort of heavily theoretical or quite theoretical ideas in taking on that challenge of how to deal with the fact that thinking about participation is already occupied. So you use Chantal Mouffe and these notions of agonistic space, but they in themselves are, I mean, that is in itself quite an overdetermined idea about how to understand participation. And so I was wondering how useful those kind of things really are for what you're trying to do, and whether it is not much more a matter of sort of acknowledging that these complex things or complex matters of concern, that they can at all times collapse into simple objects, or that these complicated assemblages of concern can be reduced to sort of narrow problems to be solved. So that in a way what you're dealing with in your project is much more unstable and in flux than the ideas that you've drawn on allow you to acknowledge. So yeah, what general comment, I guess, on the question. Yeah.
Again, I guess this is I started another place because this opens a discussion very similar to the one that we had in the 70s when we started to work with participatory design, and we were all Marxists, and some of us thought that, well, maybe it would be interesting to see if this theory that we have could in some way be instructive to the design practices that we were involved with. So we started to do different kinds of participatory design, and our colleagues that had read a few more books told us that, well, you cannot do it this way. This is just ridiculous. It's not being Altvater would never accept this interpretation of looking at capital accumulation. Maybe we're having a similar debate now, and you can discuss whether it worked the last time or if it works now. But I think that the tricks or the rhetoric figure that some of us find intriguing is to take a lot of the STS knowledge, which have served the STS community well in doing ethnographies and doing really interesting works, trying to understand the complexity of our society and how technology and people are hybrids. But the idea here, and with the risk of almost becoming ridiculous, is to turn this performative. To say that, well, as designers, what does it help us really to open up the concept of the thing and look into thinking? And to many designers that I met, that's a little bit of an eye-opener. Well, yeah, that could work. And with the infrastructuring concept, well, it's great for doing ethnographies and analysis, but maybe it can inform the way we do the practice of designing, of this constant interweaving over time. And with the concept of agonism, which is maybe, it then comes from a little bit to the Marxist heritage, but the idea of being very clear about which, I mean, you could do with the thing concept, but the idea that you align actors that very clearly not have common objectives, but to try to find ways where they can, and you're not expecting consensus, you're not expecting the one fix for all, but you're expecting maybe some constructive going-ons out of that. So that's for good or bad, that's at least the attempt.
I think just to add to that, not to supplement it, it strikes me that in relation to the last question as well, that there's an iterative process whereby the theoretical constructs you work with are going to be affected and impacted upon by the creativity of data. You're always going to be surprised by your engagement with various people and those get adapted. So, question up there, and then.
Are you pointing at me? Sorry. I want to ask a similar question, and again about participatory design, but not the participatory bit as to how to convince people to do participation, which kind of is then in that Marxist genealogy that you go, about, what design is doing. And a specific kind of moment in the story that you told about trying to help the Women's Association and failing on the first one and the second one, and also to do with the fact that, again, this kind of crowded scene. So one can understand that the corporation is obviously saying, yes, we want designers involved in this because we understand open innovation and people, etc., and designers, it makes sense to have them involved. But as someone who's also participating in Manzini-style DESIS research, the other question is that when you're working in the space of social innovation, you quite often come up with the question, well, what the hell are designers doing in the space of trying to help an immigrant issue to do with that? And so I'm interested in how designers, I can understand why designers want to be involved in that, but I don't understand why anybody else wants designers in that. So I'm asking this question because at that point in your story, you said the way you almost justified your involvement in the project was as a university, not as a designer. And it certainly makes sense in terms of Utopia because the work was associated with the kind of graphic industry which had designers already, and that made sense. But the world everywhere, I mean right here in the UK in terms of big society right now, it makes total sense to turn to a designer to fix the NHS. What's going on?
maybe it's something to do with the word creativity that was kind of invented by somebody who was actually a dean of Goldsmiths College. But I mean, I think it's taken hold as a core concept, certainly in UK policy. So, you know, we see the rise of various types of new disciplines of design starting to engage with and address policy, and to an extent synthesize these various sort of disciplines. So you can get within the discourse this notion of connecting things up, co-creation. So in a sense, there's a, you know, that's kind of one, I think in particular the UK, I can't speak about America or other countries, Scandinavia for example, but certainly in the UK, new promises are being attached to design as a kind of socio-material way of rethinking public services, for example.
Yeah, so that I guess could be the theoretical answer. I think if you look at, does it make a difference? Does it make a difference whether designers are involved in this process or not? Or could it just as well be someone in management, or someone in probably someone in management, or someone in engineering? My claim would be that there is more to the story, and a way to argue it, I think, would be we actually talked a little bit about it in the break. One of the conceptual tools that comes into this is the idea of service design and service innovation, and which is, I don't know. One way of viewing it is just a new take on old traditional systems design, information systems design thing, or but I can also see, I think several arguments see that in the hands of someone trained skillfully as a designer, actually something else is also happening with it. So I'm thinking that, and this is then by analogy, that this drawing together, this which could look as mere facilitation that goes on in collaboration with Paris Women Association or RGRA or Sustainable Hilda or other examples, that it would be really interesting with someone with maybe more of an anthropological or sociological or ethnomethodological competence to look into what is it? Because and I'm not quoting myself, but looking at some of my colleagues that are well-trained designers seem to be able to do something with that in these processes. But it's maybe it's more in the empirical question.
I'm thinking that we're going to take a couple of minutes break to rearrange some chairs down here. Feel free to chat amongst each other, and then we'll come in a couple of minutes, and then the whole panel will last 10 minutes.